a boxing betting expert.
I know, David.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
He really gets into the nitty-gritty of this whole thing.
So, Pavvy, I'm really pleased to finally talk to you. I've admired your work from afar for a long time. I was delighted to learn. I'm not actually that surprised that your passions extend from tennis to the sport of boxing as well. So, I think those sports have a lot of crossover, the mental aspect, the one against one. And anyone who knows you will know that you do not sit on the fence. So, I think we're going to have a fun conversation.
Thank you, David. Yeah, thanks for the great introduction and thanks for having me on. Yeah, I mean, many people probably won't know when I first joined Twitter, it was actually mainly for the boxing.
Is that right?
Yeah, so I joined back in 2010 or 11, so 15 years ago. And a lot of my main kind of passion really about in terms of discussing and debating was actually boxing then. And that's kind of crossed over to kind of tennis in the last decade or so. But yeah, thanks for having me on here. Yeah, tennis is always my main passion, but I do love boxing and kind of I've grown up with boxing as well.
Superb. So, what was is your first memory in the sports sense from a tennis event or a boxing event?
I would say it's a boxing event, to be honest. I think, in terms of my relationship with, I'm in my mid-40s now, and tennis became passionate for me from when I left uni. So kind of in my early 20s, that's when I started playing it and following it. But as a kid, I would say I was brought up on the kind of the Rocky films, and they had a big impact on me, not just for boxing, but for the whole kind of sports as well, because I just loved the way that it was pitted, like kind of the USA, particularly Rocky Four with the Drago, and it really got me into boxing. And back when I started watching sport initially, it was in the 80s. And obviously boxing then was on, one of the four channels that we had. So ITV, and I remember, vividly kind of getting behind the likes of Frank Bruno. But boxing was very much my first kind of boxing and football, I'd say, on par, were my first two sports that I really started to enjoy watching.
So, did you have was it a family member at home that was encouraging you, or was it literally just because of the movie, seeing Rocky, and then the torch was lit?
It was, yeah, I would say it was probably more the movie. I think, I was the kind of kid who had Rocky posters on every,
Oh, wow.
that's all I had on my wall. That film kind of, the whole box set, three, four, or how many there were, that really impacted me. But my dad was always keen on watching boxing. So we were, whilst my dad wasn't particularly keen on sports, he loved watching sports. So, watching boxing with my dad, and I remember being allowed to stay up at late at night, to watch boxing. That was kind of what really got me into sport. I think boxing was the first sport that I thought, wow, this is something that I really enjoyed the one-on-one aspect of it, and it really kind of got me into loads of other sports. But boxing was one of my first loves.
So, do you remember what the first fight was where you sort of felt that way?
It's going to have to probably be back in the Frank Bruno days.
Yeah.
So Bruno was one of my first sporting kind of inspirations.
Yeah, awesome.
Because I mean, and I'll give you the reasons behind that. I mean, with the Rocky, particularly Rocky Four, when it was all this USA versus Russia, and the way that he kind of went to, he went to Russia, he fought Ivan Drago, and he kind of got the crowd onto his side, he won, and it kind of helped me become a patriot. And I'm still a patriot, but I was. My mum and dad are immigrants, but when they came to this country, they kind of said, this is the country that's given us an opportunity. We must adhere to their culture, their rules, and support them. And that's kind of how I was brought up. So I was, whether it be football, whether it be boxing, I was always backing the Brits.
Yeah.
And in boxing, I always felt that we never really had anyone good. It was always like, we would never really get to America. It would always be the American boxers, or it would be the Russians, or it would be the Europeans. And I was just thinking, we've literally got no box. And I was like, I really want to get behind someone. And Frank Bruno was that first boxer that I thought, actually, this guy he can box, and I thought he can actually mix it up. And when he, one of my first memories, I think, is when he beat Oliver McCall for his world title. And I can just remember thinking, my God, Britain have got like a proper boxer. And the fact that he was even then fighting against Mike Tyson, who at the time when I was at school, a lot of people were, you're either Tyson or Bruno, but a lot of them were big Tyson fans. Everyone was Tyson. And I was like, well, I support Bruno. And they were like, but he's rubbish compared to. And I'm like, but he's Brit. And a lot of people couldn't understand that. And it's the same with football. I'm born and bred in Derby, and I was a big Derby County fan. But when I was growing up, Liverpool were like the dream team. And so a lot of people supported Liverpool because they were the best. But I would always support people from where I come from, where I live. So Bruno was my first kind of sporting inspiration, and it's a little bit sad really now, because I think after his career, Bruno did a lot of pantomime, he did a lot of jokes, and he became a bit of a celebrity, and I think a lot of people remember him more for his pantomimes now than what he was when he was at his peak. And I think even Mike Tyson said he was one of the hardest punchers that he's ever faced, and he never really threatened Tyson in those fights, but the fact that he was there, the fact that he was in the US fighting, prime time, which back then in the mid 80s, it was quite rare. So that was kind of where I started. And then after that, a lot of my role models followed on from that. So Nassim Hamid, for me then became, and I was probably maybe at college time now, 18, 19. And at that time, it was still very rare for an Asian boxer from Britain to be at the forefront, and I think Nassim Hamid, me being an Asian, and there was still, there's still elements of racism. There was, I think, thankfully for me, I didn't face a lot of it, but there was racism around. And, you would normally think, an Asian person, they would go down to cricket or, a sport that Asians thrive in. But when we saw Nassim Hamid come on as an Asian guy and sell out stadiums, not just in the UK, but in America. And then we have the Sky money. And so, I was, I had to have every channel on Sky, and I was completely taken away by his, not just his skills, but his confidence and the fact that he didn't care. But, he kind of had his own brand. So he became an inspiration to me, and it just kind of all followed on. Chris Eubanks was a big.
So I think, can I just say, Pavvy, I think on the Hamid point, I don't think enough is made of that, because you're right. It was unusual to see where his background, and he had 100% of British support. He was he was sort of the Ricky Hatton before Ricky Hatton was doing Ricky Hatton things, and everyone looks at Hamid now, and you think of the showboating and the flamboyance, but he absolutely had the entire nation supporting him.
Oh, without a doubt. And what and it's a good point that you mentioned, because I don't think it's spoken enough, but when he was boxing, I know a lot of, I mean, I didn't box myself, but I know a lot of my friends and a lot of my Asian friends, when they saw Nassim Hamid, wanted to go and box. And I think if we look at Nassim Hamid now, he was around about 20 years ago, but 20 years later, those kids are now boxing, are now turning pro. There's so many Asian boxers now from Britain. And a lot of them will credit Nassim Hamid to say, as a kid, that's who we watched and that's who we inspired. So I think he inspired a lot of Asian people, but he also, like you said, he took racism out of it, because he was supported by white, black, brown, Asian. He was, revered by everyone. And he almost he brought everyone together to say, actually, Asians are not just, not just cricketers, which we were famous of being. We can box as well. So I think it was, a big thing that he did, and it's not really spoken about enough.
So I couldn't agree more. And the Bruno thing's very interesting, because I think Bruno is also someone who had the entire nation supporting him, and he also was someone who made the absolute maximum out of his talents. Like, in terms of sort of talent optimization, there's Frank Bruno. He could not have done more than he did with his skill set. But I'm interested to ask you, if you were all supporting the Brits, Bruno versus Tyson, who would you support when Andy Murray was playing Novak Djokovic?
I mean, it's a great question. It's a really, really great question. And I get asked it a lot. And I think I've always said that whether it be tennis, I've always been a big supporter of Britain in tennis.
Yeah.
And a lot of, and I know a lot of friends that are British tennis as well. I run a tennis club, and we sometimes get British tennis players that play. And I've always been asked this question a lot on the tennis podcast, and I will always say, in a team event, so a Davis Cup,
Right.
if Britain are playing Serbia, I will still support Britain.
Yeah.
But tennis for me, as an individual sport, and Andy Murray against Djokovic, it would always be Djokovic, because Djokovic is one of my all-time inspirations.
Yeah.
And my patriotism, I have to be honest with you, has got less and less in the last few years. And those who follow me on X or social media will know why, because I think that the way that the world is at the moment, the way that Britain is at the moment, I feel the establishment have taken over. So I don't feel the same level of allegiance to Britain in terms of supporting all of their people like I did that I did 20 years ago, because I just think the world and society has changed, and it's become more like a global, I think Britain now is part of a global market, and I wish that we weren't. I wish that we weren't. I was one of the few that was proudly a Brexiteer, and a lot of people couldn't understand that. But I was like, well, I'm proud of being British.
Yeah.
But I think we've lost a lot of that in cultures, and that same's happened in boxing now. So boxing now is, I wouldn't automatically say my favourite boxers are British, but having said that, a lot of them still are. So,
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think, case in point, I have absolutely no hesitation in supporting Alexander Usyk over Tyson Fury. If they fight once, twice, or a million times, my support is with Usyk, not Tyson Fury. And as a proud Brit, really, why are you not supporting? Well, no, I mean, yeah. So I agree. But again, when I was a kid, it was all about. Actually, no, I remember my father would take me to Lords often to watch the cricket, and I always supported the West Indies against England. And he thought I was crazy. He's like, "Why are you supporting the West Indies against England?" Because I like fast bowlers. I want to be a fast bowler, and that is why I'm supporting that team. So I know you're a decent tennis player.
I'm decent, yeah. So I started really getting into it in 20. So I'm say, I'm a decent amateur tennis player. So I play in the top level in our county, but I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near a professional or anything like that. But yeah, I couldn't, I've hit with professionals before.
Right.
I haven't done particularly well against them. I couldn't probably get many points in a match against them, but I can hold my own. I've got a decent serve, and I can probably hold my own and stuff. But yeah, tennis in terms of sporting wise, I'd probably say that's my highest skill that I've got.
And being so tennis is insanely technical. You walk past a park, most people cannot play tennis. They think there's no top spin in sight. There's just it's an incredibly difficult sport that the pros make look easy, but it really is not. But do you think your high level of performance, like relatively high level of performance, helps you sort of assess matchups in the ATP and the WTA when you're watching?
I would like to think so. Whether it's tennis or boxing, I've got a very analytical mind. So, my job's been in finance and statistics, and I've always been, my friends when I was a kid used to call me Stato.
Yeah, right.
Because I used to write, whether it be cricket, boxing, I used to write stats, and I've kind of taken that into tennis now. So I hope that gives me a good insight into kind of what's happening, and it's not. And I think tennis and boxing, like you said, are so similar. They're so technical, they're so tactical, but they're also so mental. They're so physical. They're one-to-one combat sports. And the reason why I like both of them is that I love the I love the one-to-one interaction. And you really get inside the mind of someone, and you just think, I've got so much respect for every boxer that ever walks onto that ring, win, lose, or draw. Because to even get there, they've had to put in so much hard work in the gym, so much hard work mentally, physically, diet, and it's the same for tennis. And I've got so much respect for people that have made it in these two sports, because I think they're so difficult and so mentally difficult, because you're on your own a lot of the time. So yeah. I mean, but to answer your question, I think I mean, the fact that I play a decent tennis level, I think, does give me an insight. But I'm not one of these people that think that you have to be excelling in a certain sport to be able to commentate or have views on certain things.
Sure.
I'm not one of those.
Yeah. So in terms of the stats, is there either in boxing or tennis one particular stat that you will sort of? So I was always a believer of the I think Pete Sampras said something about you're only as good as your second serve or something. I think the second serve stat is like a massive one. How well Andy Murray was very good at defending his second serve.
Yeah.
Like, is there one sort of stat that sticks out when you're looking at a match?
When I look at the match, I mean, when I look at it as a whole, I think the difference between the top player, the elite players, and the top players are the ones that can deliver when it matters the most.
Mm.
So for that stat in tennis, it will be breakpoint conversion.
Yeah.
So it was like, when if you want to win a match of tennis, you have to break your opponent.
Yeah.
Now, I think Brad Gilbert said, who's a top tennis coach, he said that the top 100 players have pretty much got all the same skills. They've got every shot in the book, but only some can deliver it when it matters the most. So when the pressure's on, when the fans are there, when you know that if you convert this point, you're probably going to go and win this match.
Yeah.
So for me, a really key stat in tennis is breakpoint conversion. Is like, how often can these people, when it matters most, produce their best tennis? And one of the reasons that I've loved Djokovic, and he's such an inspiration for me, is that time and time again, when he needs it, he kind of delivers it when the pressure's on the most. And that's why I think they call him the king of clutch, in that, when he knows he needs to win a point, he just will do everything he can to make it so difficult for his opponent.
He is absolutely the poster boy for that. He has normalized excelling during adversity. It is the people have got used to it. They're no longer impressed by it. It is absolutely extraordinary. Even in these late years of his career, winning the gold in Paris was against the odds with an injury, was Hollywood stuff. It was absurd. And I've got a few mates who I only ever hear from them when Djokovic does something like that, and he's like, our boy's done it again, mind blown. I'm like, he's been doing it for decades.
He has, and he's another one who doesn't get the credit for it as well. He still doesn't get the credit for what he does.
I think he'll be one of these who is a bit like Lennox Lewis, gets more credit when he's gone, when he's hung up the racket. People are going to miss him, and I was saying to you before we started filming, my interest in tennis is waning the further Djokovic gets to hanging up the racket, because I mean, there are some great stars coming through, but tennis is an exhausting sport to follow because you have to give up 5 hours of your afternoon to watch 7 matches. But are you still completely engrossed in the sport as Novak's sort of getting older?
Yeah, very much so. Obviously Djokovic is still playing, so I'm still engrossed in it. But I just love tennis full stop. I would probably say I'm a tennis addict in that I love playing. I will try and play 2 or 3 times a week, but I love watching it as well. And even some people say, what are you going to do when Djokovic retires? It's going to be a sad moment, but I am a tennis fan. And I will kind of, there's a lot of exciting new tennis players coming in. And I find it interesting with the whole politics of it as well. And I think we're going to see that in boxing more so now with all the Saudi money coming through. And it's going to be interesting for me. And one thing that, you mentioned Usyk. I mean, one of my favorite all-time fighters is Tyson Fury.
Okay.
And he's been, after Djokovic, Tyson Fury is my number 2.
Right.
And that might shock a few. And I've seen a few boxing podcasts, and very few boxing people will ever say that. But I do feel that he's had very, very similar treatment from what I call the establishment, which is the establishment media and people that, he wasn't Matchroom, he wasn't under Eddie's wing. And as a result, I think he wasn't marketed as anywhere near as, a fraction of what Anthony Joshua was. But in terms of out and out skill, technical boxing, he could box on the inside, he could box on the outside. He had a great engine, one of the best chins in the sport. And he could go southpaw, he could fight orthodox. He was, but tactically he was one of the most astute boxers that I have ever seen. And I never think he gets the credit that he deserves because of all the stuff that he does and says that are then magnified, and people will think, well, he's not a right person, and he's not, like a Usyk, and so it's very easy for people to hate on him. But from my experience, I always think Tyson Fury is like the Novak Djokovic of boxing, whereas Anthony Joshua was kind of marketed like the Roger Federer of boxing.
I get that, but I think Novak put off court oozes class. Some people will critique what he says, and I'm like, this is just a magnanimous, sporting, generous human being, and I would not accuse Tyson Fury of those things. No. He lacks the class that Novak has.
No,
but so what do you feel with both of those guys, late 30s now, getting to the end? Andy Murray played potentially a year too long, maybe not. Up to him, totally fine. Do you think Andy Murray should have retired sooner? And in relation to that, do you think Novak should get out before he lost 3 in a row last month for the first time ever, like in a decade or whatever it was? Do you think he should get out before he starts losing to number 50 in the world on a regular basis?
No, I think with Andy Murray, it was different. So, Andy Murray actually retired 5 years ago, initially, 6 years ago, when he had the hip operation. And that was really, really unlucky because at the age of 29, he had just got to the world number 1. He was at the pinnacle of his career. But by getting to number 1, he'd played so much that his body started to kind of fall apart, and his hip went, and that was in 2016. In 2017, he actually announced his retirement from tennis, and there was a big tribute at the Austrian Open. He managed to come back. He had reconstructive surgery. He came back. He was never the same player. So Andy Murray was never the same player because a lot of his game was similar to Djokovic in that he wore people down. He relied on his immense fitness to kind of he knew that he was fitter and stronger than a lot of the opponents, and the opponents knew that, and that was his big weapon, if you like. But when he had that hip injury, he was never the same player. So yes, he might have had a couple of good wins, but he never really won. He won a 250, but he never was. Once he came back, he was never a serious contender at a Grand Slam. I think the difference with Djokovic is that he has looked after his body really, really, really well. Now, I know some of his team, and I remember one of his team who work with him in terms of doing his stats was saying that his numbers that he was producing, this was last year, were the same numbers that he was producing from a fitness point of view 10 years ago. So It was almost like he's kept that level. Now, I think the big thing with Djokovic is motivation. I still think at 36 he can go till 40 because of the way that I know that he looks after his body. He meditates every day, does yoga every day. He meditates every day. He eats one of the best diets that there is. So his metabolism age is going to be a lot less than what he is. So I think if his motivation is there, like last year, his main motivation was the only thing that he didn't have on his CV was the Olympic gold. And in that event, he became a completely different player, and it's motivation. And I think what's motivating him at the moment is the fact that Alcaraz and Sinner have come to the fore, and I think he's thinking, hang on, I can still mix here. And he said it often on the interviews that whilst I can still compete, I've still got that motivation. So I think he's going to play a lot of restricted schedule, but I still think he's going to be there or thereabouts this year, and then maybe kind of next year he'll probably look to really kind of taper down on his, because he does a lot of other stuff. Philanthropy is a big thing for him, and he wants to do other stuff as well. So I think at the moment, yes, he lost 3 in a row, but he lost those 3 when he had a hamstring tear. So he lost to Zverev. That was he had a hamstring tear. He played Doha. He played Indian Wells. That was just 3 weeks after a test. So I don't think he was fully fit for those. So I think let's see how he gets on. I think I think judge him at the French Open and see where he is then, and Wimbledon.
So you think he's got a couple of years at least of contending for Grand Slams?
Yeah, very much so. I think this year he will be there or thereabouts in the rest of the 3 slams. And I think next year he'll still be able to mix it. And then Then he gets to 38, 39, and that's probably when he'll probably start. But he did mention in an interview recently, like Tom Brady's one of his inspirations, that he has said he would love to play until he's 40.
Brilliant. And do you think maybe with the age he might start focusing on the grass just for like less wear and tear?
Yeah, absolutely. Grass is easier on the knees and the back, which is why I
Yeah.
love it as well.
Yeah.
But it's one of the easier surfaces. But yeah, I think so, and I think the serve becomes more important because the serve is
Yeah.
the quickest point in tennis,
Yeah.
and grass is where you get the most points quickly. So I think grass will be a big priority, and I think he's got one eye on Roger Federer's Wimbledon record.
Yeah.
He's one behind that. You'd love to kind of at least get one, maybe even two Wimbledons to kind of break that record, and he's going to be there or thereabouts.
I mean, he's known for his return, obviously, but his serve is probably like top 5 in the history of the sport statistically. I imagine. I mean, it's up there with the very best, isn't it?
Yeah, it is now, but it never was.
Yeah.
It never was. So I think when he had Goran Ivanisevic, who was one of the biggest servers on the tour, he coached him for 7, 8 years, and I think he really improved his serve
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
But I think Djokovic is a student of the sport, and he knew that when he was getting older, that he was going to have to find a weapon that was giving him free and cheap
Yeah.
points, and that's why he himself has worked tirelessly on
Yeah.
his serve. So now it's right up there, but it wasn't before. He was always regarded as the best returner,
Yeah.
not the server. But now he's kind of added that serve to his game.
He used to have a sort of bowling action with his serve, didn't it? It was very
He
sort of
did.
aesthetically pleasing. So if I put you on the spot, he's on 24 slams now.
Mhm.
What's his number when all is said and done?
I've always said 25 and 25. I've put that hashtag out. I always think that he's going to
Yeah.
get to 25 slams in 2025,
Yeah.
and I believe that. So I think I think he's got 2 more slams in him.
Okay.
But I think Djokovic, he likes numbers. He likes
Yeah.
symbolic numbers, and 25 is a nice symbolic number. And
Yeah.
I think he's keen for that. He's also on 99 career titles.
Is he?
So one more title, whether it be a slam or he goes to 100 titles and 25. I think he would be happy to retire with 25 slams and 100 titles.
Yeah. Wow.
But I think if he wanted to, he could get at least 2 more.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you some boxing questions, but this is just fascinating on the tennis stuff. Who is his ultimate threat? Is it Sinner or is it Alcaraz? Or is it someone else?
It's interesting because obviously, Sinner, it's difficult for me to kind of gauge where his level is at, because obviously he was found to have a banned substance for performance enhancing. We all know about that, and in the end, he's kind of done a deal with WADA where he's banned for 3 months. Was he intentionally doping? I don't know. I don't know. They've gone on what he's kind of given. His story wasn't verified by anyone other than his team, so there was no independent verification. They've gone on this story that he was getting massaged by his physio, who was using a banned substance that was a known banned substance, and through the massage, because Yannick Sinner has lesions, a little bit went into his system. I think it's one of the most craziest sports stories that I've ever heard, but a lot of people have bought it because he's backed by a lot of powerful sponsors, and they'll make sure that messaging is out there to make sure that no one questions it. So I don't know when Sinner comes back how he's going to react mentally, whether he's going to be under more scrutiny, whether he's going to have more checks. So I don't know. I mean, so it's a difficult question with Sinner. I mean, was it a genuine mistake, and it was just this, and then he's going to go back to normal? But he's gone through a lot, and he's still young. So it's going to be really interesting when he returns, if he's going to be at that level. I don't think he will be, because I know how much of a mental sport tennis is.
Yeah.
Alcaraz was the player that was starting to kind of beat Djokovic regularly and in big titles. But if you look at their 5 matches now, in the last 5 matches, Djokovic has beaten him 4 times.
Is that right?
So he's starting to kind of almost grab the control. Wow. He's beaten him the last 2 times. He beat him obviously in the Olympic final and also at the Australian Open quarterfinal. So I think Djokovic has got a little bit of a psychological edge over Alcaraz.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think then you look at the young players coming through, Jakob Mansik, João Fonseca.
Okay.
You know, a lot of young players are going to come through. Djokovic isn't going to be, you know, going on forever, so he's going to have threats from younger players. But what I've always said is if Djokovic is at his best, it doesn't matter who the opponent is,
Yeah.
because I still think him at his best, even at 37, he's going to be 38 in May. He's still the best player to beat as it stands, and I think he welcomes challenges. To be honest, it keeps him motivated.
Yeah, it's great. It's great that that whole. I mean, it's like 20 years older than those guys, or more or less. Yeah.
Yes.
So okay, with the stats background and the sort of analytical mind, and boxing being your sort of first love, did you use that sort of interest and expertise to bet on the sport?
I did, yeah, and you know, I was one of these people that kind of grew up at the time where online gambling kind of really exploded.
Yeah.
And you know, I'd been a keen poker player.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what really got me into gambling, and that's because of my love for stats.
Yeah.
And you know, poker, I was trying to figure out, you know, what cards have gone, what cards are left. So I tried to use that analytically, and I was quite successful in poker, particularly online, and you know, that's what was my main passion. But when you're online playing poker, then you're then kind of introduced to other sports. And at the time, I had bookmakers that were throwing me £50 free bets, £100 free bets, and it was everywhere. It wasn't regulated as it is now, and it was kind of, you know, people. You know, I was probably in my 20s, and like quite a few of my friends, we were quite impressionable, and I started thinking, well, hang on, if I can make money poker, I can use my knowledge in boxing, I can use my knowledge in tennis and football, and I can make loads of money. And you know, I kind of got into that mindset, and you know, ironically enough, boxing was one of the sports that I was actually making decent money on.
Wow.
And I would actually, you know, I mean, one of my favorite boxers, probably not due to anything else, but due to the fact that he made me a lot of money, was Floyd Mayweather.
Of course.
And you know, I think Floyd, you know, technically one of the best boxers that we've ever seen, and you know, I like the guy. You know, I know he kind of polarizes it, but a lot of his fights, I just couldn't see how opponents could beat him.
Yeah.
And he would be favourites for some, but the one that I remember vividly was when he fought Ricky Hatton in the US, and it was a 4 o'clock fight, and there was loads of friends, and there was a few of us who'd like gambling on the boxing, and we're just like, we were looking at the odds, and it was Hatton mania. So if you remember that thousands of Hatton fans went to Vegas, this was on the national news. And I think Mayweather, at the start of the week, his odds were like 1-3.
Yeah.
So still a favourite, but you think, okay, well, you know, and then by the end of the week, he'd gone down to like 4-6.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, what's happening here is that everyone's getting onto the Hatton mania. Loads of people are backing Hatton. Just the fact that he's British, he's out there, and I'm like, nothing's changed. And so we were like going, this is still Floyd Mayweather. He'd just beaten Oscar De La Hoya. He was unbeaten. Hatton was really, you know, he was at the top of his game as well. But you just felt that Mayweather, we just think, how is Hatton going to hurt him?
Yeah.
And so that was, you know, we waited for 4 o'clock, and I remember that was probably one of my biggest bets that I put on. It was 4-6.
Yeah.
And even though I was, you know, it was a Brit and I wanted Hatton to win, I was thinking, well, the smart money would tell me that Floyd's going to win this, and he did. And you know, I don't think at any stage Hatton looked like he was going to win that fight. So it was kind of, you know, it was almost like, oh, you know, kind of easy money. But yeah, that was all down to statistics. And you know, for boxing, what I would do is I would look at the pre-weeks, I would look at the weigh-ins, I would look at their camps, I would look at their social media, I would look at their body language. And you know, that would give. I would obviously look at their recent fights, you know, the circumstances, and I would look at all those kind of stats and styles, and then make a decision in terms of, you know, where you're going to go. And you know, I always used to follow the in play boxing, because I always think that traders, you know, obviously you're going to have great experience with this, have a good idea of where the fight's going to go. So you know, in play, I always found that was quite an interesting kind of guideline as to kind of where the fight's going to go, and if you can see it then as well, you can then go on in play. But the same for tennis. I tried to use that statistics. I found that this was about 20 years ago, and I found at the end there's a reason why they say the bookmakers always win in the end. It's something that unless you're very disciplined, unless you've got time and commitment to kind of study everything and stick to kind of what it's very difficult to be successful gambling kind of casually. And I know a lot of friends that do it professionally, and they are very successful because they've got that time and they've got that discipline to be successful. So I think you need to be a certain character, but you also need to have that time and dedication to take it seriously.
Absolutely. There's recreational betting because it's a lot of fun and that's all for, and there's like you say, the discipline involved with doing it as a serious pursuit. Those two things are kind of different activities.
Absolutely.
So I remember the Mayweather price against Hatton, absolutely as you describe it. I was part of that. My week was entirely as you described it as well. And but do you have any where you've just got it wrong? I mean, we all have, but I've got some absolute howlers. But anyway, you've just thought you had a decent bet, you've got it wrong, and just thought, hold on, I need to sort of back off a bit here.
Yeah, I think so. I think when Khan, I was a Khan fan as well, following on from Nassim, and when he lost to Bradis Prescott, I think it was his first one, which was I didn't see that coming.
No.
I automatically assumed that Khan was going to be like Nassim Hamid, and I didn't think he ever reached those heights, but I think he did really, really well. He's another one that I didn't think got the credit that he deserved, and so didn't expect that. But there's been a few. I mean, I watched Fury and Usyk, both of them, and I'm one of the few that felt that Fury won the second fight.
Okay. Wow.
And there was five of us watching that fight. And two, there was two Usyk fans and two Fury fights. And what we do is when we get together and watch it, we score the fight. And all of us had Fury winning by one or a draw. And the bookmakers had Fury favourite to win that fight in running from round 3 right up until the decision. And the decision, it was 5-6. But a lot of it, which was 50-50 for those that don't know, it's 50-50 either way. But up until that point, Fury was favourite.
Yeah.
And, I'm one of the few that will say that, because then after that, you've got, Usyk is now marketed, he's sponsored by powerful people. It quickly gets rubbish. But at the time, if you looked at the BBC commentary website, you looked at Twitter, everyone's like, oh, actually, we think Fury's nicked this. But it was quickly quashed. And, I think one of the reasons Fury retired, he put out a comment saying Dick Turpin, he wasn't happy with that. He was fuming.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was impressed with some of the comments from Turkey Alashek after the fight, where they had 116, 112 on the AI, and all the referees had 116, 112. I don't think I've ever seen a fight where all three scorecards are exactly the same. Even the AI was exactly the same.
Yeah.
And you've got to think, what was going on here. But I mean, that doesn't take anything away from Usyk's. He's unbelievable, the best. He's proved himself time and time again. But I do think Fury's going to be remembered for those two fights. In the first fight, I think if he didn't have his dad in his ring and he didn't showboat after when he was way on top, he would have won that. I think Fury in the first fight didn't know how good Usyk was.
Yeah.
So he could have knocked him out in round 7, I think, when he rattled him. And you probably know, being a bookmaker, Usyk was like 7-1 then, 6-1 in running. It was, they thought Fury was a done deal, and he kind of backed off. And Usyk comes strong in later on in fights, which not people. And John Fury was giving him different messages, and it was all very confused in his corner. There was a lot of different noises going on as to what he needed to do. In the second fight, I thought he took him away into camp. He worked hard. He hasn't quite got those legs now.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people don't know is that he had Usyk gassing in the last couple of rounds. Not many boxers do that because he's the fittest boxer that there is. But when I've read all the commentary afterwards from boxing podcasts, and no one ever talks about that, and everyone's like, "Oh, he lost," but he did 24 rounds with Usyk. He was way, way better than what Joshua did.
Oh yeah,
He could have won those 2 fights, whereas Joshua never looked at any stage at hurting, well, really hurting or beating Usyk. I thought Usyk was in total control against his fights and Joshua,
yeah,
but he never really got that credit, and he still doesn't. And I do feel a little bit sorry for him because I think a lot of people, a bit like Frank Bruno, which is now probably more remembered for his pantomimes than his
yeah,
boxing. Fury's going to be remembered for those
yeah,
two fights that he lost, which, with a flick of it was so close that he could have won both of those.
yeah. I think absolutely. They both looked old. They looked their age in that fight. I think.
Yeah.
So, do you think we'll see Fury again after the Dick Turpin speech?
I don't know. I think that his reading behind the scenes, I think he had a good relationship with Turkey, Alashek. I think that's broken down a little bit. And I
Okay.
think Turkey kind of said afterwards, well, he wanted the bar and he wanted a unified fight. And then everything, oh, okay, well, now we understand why. And I think, with the fact that they're controlling the sport now, where does he go from here? Yes, I think he would love to fight Joshua because I think he would still beat Joshua comfortably, in my opinion.
Okay.
But he's made more money from these 2 fights than he would ever have. So money isn't a motivation
No.
for Tyson. The only motivation for him is the last time he retired and came back was mainly his wife Paris, who was saying that he started struggling mentally.
Mm.
So Tyson is someone that boxes to keep himself mentally strong, and fit. And when he retired last time, he started his mental health started waning. He started drinking. He started eating bad, and that's even when Paris was saying, "Look, if this is what it's going to turn you into, go back to boxing." So I think this all depends on Tyson's head. If he's strong and got good people around him, and he feels that he can survive and prosper and be happy without boxing. And I know a lot of his cousins and family are still boxing, and he still goes to events, so he still loves that. Then I think this may well be the retirement. But if he starts to struggle mentally, and he misses that addiction, he's a boredom, all he's known is boxing, and he needs to get back, then he might just think, actually, I need to have I need to go in camp. I need to have a fight. And I think the only fight really that's out there at the moment that would make any sense would be Joshua, maybe Dubois, maybe Parker again. But or maybe another. I don't know. Yeah.
I think he probably, there's something there that's probably thinking, I don't want to go out on back-to-back defeats.
Yeah.
Get AJ, Wembley Stadium. Like you say, he's got a great chance in that fight. So yeah, and he is. I mean, he's 35, I think. So he's there's potential for that. So so apart from those sort of Fury Usyk fights, what any other highlights from sort of 2024 that sticks in your mind as like a great fight you enjoyed?
I mean, I love the fights. Absolutely, the both of them. I think they were really, really good. Obviously, the Butov fights were, were to see two boxers that are at the top of their sports go head and head, and we've missed that so many times in boxing where it's never quite happened. They weren't the knockout kind of fights, but I really enjoy the technical aspect of them. I really enjoy the fact that both of them go out to win. And I think even boxing casuals, and I would probably say I'm more of a casual now. I think I was hardcore maybe 10 years ago under when Matchroom and Sky really kind of lifted British boxing, and you were getting world champions every other week. But I think one of the big fights that I enjoyed was Dubois and Joshua. Because as I said, I think Joshua's done a lot for the sport, but I think that's mainly due to Eddie Hearn handpicking his opponents throughout his career, and the fact that he speaks so well, he looks immaculate. He was the Frank Bruno of the modern era, and he sold a record amount of tickets. But I always questioned his actual boxing ability against the elite. If you look at his career, when he won the world championship, he beat Charles Martin, who was one of the worst world champions I've ever seen. But this was all stemming from Tyson's mental issues. So he lost all of his belts after he beat Klitschko. So I think Joshua was in the right place at the right time. But you had Eddie Hearn, who I would probably say is boxing's establishment. And you know, a lot of the time I used to give Eddie Hearn a lot of grief on X, and he used to bite sometimes. And you
Right.
know, it became quite a fun thing because I used to just hammer him saying he was part of the establishment, he was a silver spoon, which is ironic because I had a lot of respect for his dad,
Yeah.
Barry Hearn, because of what
Yeah.
he did for darts and snooker, and you know, those are the other two sports that I'm really big on. So you know, so when Joshua kind of lost to Andy Ruiz, I wasn't that surprised. But I still thought that he would absolutely hammer him. But when he got knocked out, I know that he would struggle. And then he kind of had these other kind of Otto Wallin, and he you know, he didn't really fight anyone of
Yeah.
any kind of caliber until he fought Dubois.
Yeah.
And you think, well, okay, well, this was the fight that was going to land him another fight with Fury or Usyk or World Championship again. And the way that Dubois just took him apart from round one, and I've never seen um, any, like, a fellow British boxer just kind of not fear Andy, Joshua, and the way that he kind of wasn't intimidated by him in the rings off,
Yeah.
you know, when he was kind of
Yeah.
ready to, you know, and he backed up what he said. So you know, for me that was quite enjoyable to see, and
Yeah.
it's good to see a new face, because I think a bit like you are with Djokovic and tennis, with Fury coming to the end, Amir Khan was one of my favourites, Carl Froch was one of my favourites. They've all come to the end of their kind of careers, so I'm almost like thinking, well, who's my favourite now? Do
Yeah.
you know what
Yeah.
I mean? And
Agree.
Floyd Mayweather was
Yeah.
one of my favourites. So
Yeah.
a lot of the people that I passionately follow, Tony Bellew,
Yeah.
you know, Kell Brook, a lot of the Brits that I backed and follow, Billy J Saunders, and you know, loads of really people that I watched all of their fights. They've all kind of come into the end of their careers.
Yeah. Yeah.
George Graves, James DeGale, and it's quite sad for me because
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, I used to watch all of these fights, and
Yeah.
they're all now going away, and you know, there's a new bunch of boxers coming through, and I haven't really got into the same sort of kind of commitment or passion that I did with the others.
Yeah. We, like you say, yeah. Dubois, mid-20s, brilliant. We haven't had an elite level mid-20s heavyweight. We've got Moses Itamu coming through as well, pretty exciting. They were talking about him beating Mike Tyson's record, but you can't not but be excited when he fights. But you say you're a casual, but that Beterbiev Bivol fight, you know, I don't think that transcended to the casual audience. But you stayed up. Well, it wasn't that late, but you watched both of those.
Yeah, I watched both. I wouldn't say I would probably say I'm a little bit more than a
Yeah.
casual, but less hardcore. I would say I was hardcore about 10 years ago, and that's when Sky had all the boxing. And there, and I love the, you know, I love the rivalry that Matchroom had with Queensbury. I love the fact that, you know, even though, you know, Eddie loves himself, Eddie Hearn loves himself, but he's a really good promoter. I have to say that, you know, he does. If you're in his team, you know that he's going to do
Yeah.
absolutely everything for you. And that's what you want as a as a promoter. Yeah, a lot of people don't like him, and I think he's, you know, he's arrogant. He loves himself, but he got the big fights in America as well, and
Yeah.
he actually transcended the British fighters, and they started becoming a regular feature and headlining not just in America, and then Britain became the number one place, you know, with Carl Froch selling out Wembley twice, and you know, it became huge. Britain became the home of boxing for a good, you know, and I loved it. So yeah.
I'm hoping to get someone from Matchroom on this channel this summer. So I'm sitting on the fence about the Eddie Hearn and Barry Hearn comments at the moment. So let me ask. Tell me, are there any in any sport? And I know you've got certain thoughts on certain podcasts. But are there any other? Do you have a podcast? I know you've got YouTube. But
So I'm just setting up my own podcast. So I've got some guests lined up to interview. That's going to be launching at probably next 2 weeks.
Oh wow.
So that's something that's been in the pipeline for a while. Previously, I do my own kind of podcast.
What's it called? What's it called? The pod?
So we're still going to be launched properly with the full name. There's 2 or 3 names that we're still mulling over.
Yeah.
But that's all going to be disclosed shortly. And that's going to be talking. It's going to be talking straight up tennis. So it's going to be no fall to tennis is one of the short lists of the podcast that we thought, but it hasn't been finalized yet. But the whole point of that podcast is for everyone to kind of say what they think. At the moment there's a lot of tennis podcasts that are around, but there are a lot of people that say the same thing because they're sponsored by the same companies and they want the accreditations. Whereas I don't do it for money. I don't do it for likes. I'll say it as it is, and I don't mind who are upset. I'll just always speak my mind.
There's a few that have become unlistenable too. Even a couple of years ago, I think it just can't handle that. Just a completely sort of one-sided fake narrative of the sport. And
I mean, tennis podcast is one of the great examples. Where it's just one dimensional and but they're the biggest ones, and it's.
I think it's easy. You can just if you're targeting sort of 90% of the population, that's kind of what they want to hear. So I think you'll have a far more realistic assessment of what the sport is doing compared to. I mean, there's another podcast and it's 3 lads. They cannot say a single positive thing about Novak Djokovic, and it's just it's so sort of grind. It's so unbalanced. They think they're being balanced. They clearly are not being balanced. They're passionate about the sport, and I wish them well. But it's not a balanced appraisal. It's not a fair appraisal, and it's a fairness. It's the lack of fairness that puts me off these podcasts.
Absolutely.
You don't have to like an individual. You can criticize someone for not having an injection, but you have to be fair, and they don't show fairness. So so I'm looking forward to that. That'd be brilliant. And any spoilers on some of the guests you got lined up?
So you're looking at Yevgeny Kovalnikov, who's an ex-champion.
Yeah.
A 2-time Grand Slam champion, former world number 1. Hoping to get Nick Kyrgios on as well. So got some big names that I've lined up from the tennis world, and then see how it goes. I want it to kind of hopefully diverse into other sports. You'd love to have you on someday, some boxing people, some darts and football and all the other podcasts that I enjoy. But I think just talking of podcasts, one of the main reasons that I really got into boxing was IFL and Kugan Cassius, and I think that was the first time that you really got an insight into how a boxer thinks. And I think there's always been a bit of a you've never really been able to get close to boxers. I don't know why that is, and I think IFL, when it kind of launched 10-15 years ago, that gave casual fans, to me at the time, a great insight into the personality of a person. And I still to this day watch nearly all of their videos, and I have done, and the recent podcast that I really enjoy is Froch on Fighting. Because I think Carl Froch is, I think, similar to me in terms of he doesn't care about upsetting people, and he kind of says it as it is, and he has upset people, but it makes it watchable, and I think he kind of says it from the heart. And I've got a lot of respect for him for that. But that's another podcast that I never miss from boxing point of view, because it just makes me laugh.
He's great. He's insanely confident, and he's always got his tongue in his cheek, and he doesn't he's always having a bit of a wind up. He's great. Okay, and what about have you read any boxing books? We talked about Rocky at the start, but any boxing books or tennis? You talked about Winning Ugly, Brad Gilbert.
I mean, I've read that one. I've read, Djokovic did a book on his kind of diet and his kind of mindset. That was always something that was really, really interesting for me. In terms of books, I mean, I obviously I love the Rocky films. I love the film that Tony Bellew did. It's where he played Ricky Conlon. Name, and it was Michael Jordan.
Creed.
I forgot the name now.
Creed.
Yes. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So a lot of boxing, loads of boxing fights, films that I've watched, I really, really enjoy. I'm not really a book reader,
Yeah.
so I don't think I've read many. I don't think I've read any boxing. I've probably done a few. I love reading biographies, so I've probably read a few biographies, and if Tyson Fury did one, and
Yeah.
I think Amir Khan's done one as well. But some of my favourites, I'd love to hear their story, and Nassim Hamid as well.
There's a good one. I think you know him on X. He's an American journalist called Scoop something or other.
Yeah, Malowensky. Yeah, he's a
He's
good friend of mine.
right. Okay. On my coffee table, I've got his. It's called Facing Djokovic. It's a very short.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's all about. It's not really a book. He hasn't really authored it. It's just like quotes from players who know him away from the media, and it's just a
Yes.
brilliant sort of insight into the support he gives the up and come players, the
Yeah.
intimidation factor he has on the court. So yeah, I enjoyed that. Some
Yeah,
quotes in there.
Scoop's a great guy. He's another guy who kind of says it as it is, but he's also a big boxing fan. We've had he was never a big Fury fan, so that's the only thing that we've ever clashed on.
Well,
Is he was he never rated Fury, and everything else we agree on apart
he
from
he
that.
he won't remember, but I exchanged emails with him about 20 years ago
Oh,
when
really?
because he was the guy. I think this is publicly known, and he's since become quite close to Mike Tyson. But he was the guy that shouted to Mike Tyson, put him in a straitjacket when Tyson went off on one. You remember that?
Oh,
In
really?
the crazy press conference when Tyson went full on.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, that was aimed at Scoop. If
Oh,
memory
really?
serves. Yeah,
Wow. It
and
doesn't
I've
surprise
asked
me.
him. Hey,
It doesn't surprise me.
yeah,
But I'll have a chat with him about that because
dude. Because
he's a big tennis fan as well.
yeah, and yeah, I think him and Tyson have since had dinner and made amends. But you're like,
Oh,
wow,
really?
how did they repair that one?
Amazing. That's insane.
Um,
Mike Tyson's a big Djokovic fan as well. You probably
of
know.
course, yeah. I mean,
He watches
greats
him at the US
recognize
Open.
greats, don't they? Like
Yeah.
most of the greats in sport recognize Djokovic as Erling Haaland, all of them. They all
Yes.
LeBron,
Yeah.
all of them. Tom
Yeah.
Brady, like you said, all of them.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're great in what you do, you recognize the greatness in
Yeah.
Djokovic.
And Ronnie O'Sullivan's a big fan as well from
Another
snooker.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another one. All right, brilliant. So, Pavvy, we've done an hour. That's been really good fun. What until your podcast comes out in a couple of weeks, a few months, whenever it is, where can people find you?
So Pavvy G. So obviously X is my main platform. So you can follow me on Pavvy G. I'm also now on YouTube and ready for the podcast, but I'm
Okay.
doing my own kind of videos on there.
Yeah.
Mainly tennis, a couple
Yeah.
of political ones, a couple of other
Yeah.
sport ones, but mainly tennis. That's
Awesome.
also at Pavvy G. And yeah, I'll keep passionately watching boxing. I'm actually I quite enjoy Misfits now, which is
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think Mams Taylor has
Great.
done a great job, and one of my fellow guys from Derby, Ty Mitchell, he's fighting in a few weeks in Derby. So Derby have now finally got a live venue for boxing, which is great
Yeah.
from where I am.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll be hoping to go down and watch that.
Brilliant. Love it. All right, Pavvy. Well, thanks a lot for your time. That was really great fun. I love the cross section between the two sports, and I knew you'd have some good stories and great anecdotes. So thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me. Take care. All the best, mate.
Talk soon.